Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, we're going to start today with a picture of my son, Graham. Now, he's 8 years old, but when he was 6, we bought him this boomerang. The first day he got it, went outside, 3 throws in, it ended up on the second story of our house. Now, I don't go up there unless I have someone to go up on the first story and hold a ladder for me so I can get on the second story. And on the day that he threw that up there, none of my neighbors were around to help out. So it stayed there. It stayed there until this happened. This is looking at the maximum 30-foot wind gusts we had over the weekend. And as you're looking at this image, I want you to notice something. From west to east across the United States, a broad swath of North America saw wind speeds gusting between 45 and 60 miles an hour, with some locations much faster than that. Well, as I'm sure you gathered from the picture, the winds finally blew that boomerang off, and we were pretty excited to get it down, so we ran over to his buddy's house, Landon, and they started throwing it around. Well, about 10 minutes later, he comes knocking on my door, asking me if we could get out the ladder, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, the boomerang is now in the second story of Landon's house, where it will stay until we get our next strong wind event that comes across the country like this." Now, when you see these winds, I do want to point out a couple of interesting things that happened over the weekend. I'm going to take you to Buffalo, New York, right on the tip of Lake Erie. They were measuring their observed water levels 130 inches above normal. That's almost 11 feet. And these strong synoptic scale winds, which blew across the Great Lakes, caused this along their northern and eastern shores. Very, very strong synoptic scale winds on Sunday, which is the animation you're watching here. A couple of other things to point out. This is what's left of Tropical Storm Theta. And that set a record. That is the farthest to the east in November we've ever had a tropical system. We're going to talk about Iota in just a few moments. But this up here, this large circulation, is kind of the coming together of several storm systems, one of which is what's left over from once Hurricane Eta. And I'm going to show you what Eta did in combination with that stalled out frontal boundary across parts of the mid-Atlantic, getting into the Carolinas and down here to Georgia and Florida last week. See, this shows you the total accumulated precipitation all of last week, and it really highlights here the flooding that we saw across Virginia, North and South Carolina, where there were broad sectors that saw 6 to 10 inches of rainfall out of the system as it stalled out there. Now, if I just showed you this last weekend, you get this map. This was the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. And as this frontal boundary set up and passed through this part of the United States, we did get some heavier rains in parts of Missouri and southern Illinois. And also parts of Arkansas as well, where there were actually 2 reports of tornadoes here. In total, we had 47 reports of severe weather. And in a moment, I'll talk to you more about the snow that came into the Pacific Northwest, which was substantial in parts of the Cascade Mountains. But before I go on beyond that, that storm system, as it wrapped itself up into the Great Lakes, moved into the northeast. And this was a radar animation through very early this morning that shows as those storms move through the northeast, how much damage they did. Because you can see here by looking at the storm reports that 454 reports were recorded here, and all of them coming from strong straight line winds. So that stretches from Indiana to Massachusetts. Now, the significance of this event will be better put into context when I show you this line graph. What you've got here is the U.S. annual count of severe wind reports. Now, 2011 is the record setter way up here. But for a while, 2020, which is this thick blue line here, was in second place. But then an event that happened last year in 2019 put 2019 back into second. Well, you can imagine if we add in 454 reports to the end of this line, that 2020 will now be in second place for severe wind reports when looking back over the last 15 years. And that has been what has been the most dominant form of severe weather this year across the lower 48. That's severe winds. Of course, we remember the derecho in August. That was this bump you see right in through here. Speaking of severe winds, this was the satellite animation from early this morning of Hurricane Iota, which was rapidly intensifying. Hurricane Iota combined with Eta also broke a record in that we've now had 2 major hurricanes in the month of November, both of them almost in the exact same place. Now, I'm going to let you know something. When I was watching this satellite animation and waiting on the hurricane reconnaissance flight, which when I was recording this was on its way to cut through Iota here, I expect them to get some pretty chilling measurements out of this. And what I'm talking about here is that so far in 2020, despite all the record-smashing things we've seen with respect to hurricane, especially hurricane names, We have not yet had a Cat 5, but Iota might get there. It is currently sitting as of the 4 a.m. update Eastern Standard Time at 145 mile-an-hour winds. And most model guidance takes it across parts of Nicaragua and Honduras and creates a lot of flooding in this area. And that's going to be the problem because this same area had flooding like this from Eta and they're still recovering. This is a precipitation anomaly map through the next 10 days, and there's going to be widespread 10 to 20 inches of excess rainfall as Iota goes across. So this is a major humanitarian problem that we're discussing here. To come back to our discussion on snowfall, this is what happened over the weekend as we saw the great onshore flow in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascade Mountains here picking up easily between 12 and 36 inches, as did the Blue Mountains here, and also parts of the Northern Rockies as they cut through Idaho. We can also see over toward Wyoming, quite a bit of snowfall as well. Early season snowpack is critical in the Pacific Northwest, plus it'll help fight the drought issues we're seeing there. As we work through this week, I want to make one note about the jet stream pattern. I do see a lot of very long waves right now. So there's one here, one there, and one here. And why that's important to understand is because long waves tend to progress a bit more slowly. And as we look out into this forecast, let's take a look at what we should expect in terms of our weather pattern. So let's get this going. This is our high-resolution NAM model. Let's pause it here early this morning. So system number 1 is exiting, going off here through parts of Ontario into Quebec. We will see behind it some strong winds cutting across the lakes that will be cold enough to bring in some lake effect snow, and there's some scattered snow showers right in through this area we're watching early this morning. Those snow showers move through parts of Wisconsin and over into lower Michigan, and you will see again the lake effect snow coming in this area. Meanwhile, throughout the day today, we did have some decent onshore flow pushing through parts of Washington, and as we work our way into tomorrow, that's where the next main system will be cutting into North America. It's going to be right here along the coast. So by tomorrow midday, working our way into the evening hours, we will see scattered rain showers and mountain snows here in the western part of the United States. But coming back over here to the east, you can see the lake effect snow, but let's focus in on this high pressure cell moving across Illinois, Indiana, and also parts of Kentucky and Tennessee. Because once we get our way out into Wednesday morning, the high pressure cell will be sitting right here. Now, because of those long waves, it's going to take a while for this pattern to move. So in just 3 days' time, it's really just taken that high and slid it here from, the Dakotas over toward Kentucky. And we're going to watch this high shift farther to the east, allowing for moisture and heat to return to the midsection of the United States. But over this week, we see that the next, just getting us out to Friday morning here, so Monday morning to Friday morning, there will be a broad sector here of the southern Canadian prairie. Through much of the United States, it's going to see things quite dry. Of course, along the west, where that frontal boundary comes sweeping through and the trough is sitting, we do expect wetter than normal conditions and some snows in the mountains here. But a broad sector here, quite dry, and therefore I expect a lot of fall field work, and I also expect for anybody that needs to finish up harvest to get a good opportunity to do that this week. In terms of snow, you can see the lake effect. You can see the snow way to the north here, getting up here into the forested regions of these Canadian provinces. And then you can also see the snow we're expecting here along the Sierra Nevada and Cascades in the northern Rockies. Not nearly as much as we saw last week. From there, I would like to show you the European model. Let's get it playing, and we'll pause it right here where we've already seen things evolve, where that high-pressure cell is sitting over Kentucky. Now, what you're going to notice is, as I go from Wednesday, where we still have the strong onshore flow in the west and quite a bit of precipitation here, from Wednesday into Thursday morning, the main change is that high-pressure cell moves now to sit over the mid-Atlantic to parts of the northeast. So you can see the very tight pressure gradient on the backside of this. This is going to signal a midweek warm-up in the midsection of the country under very strong winds, but it's also telling us there's going to be moisture return. And we expect by the time we get into Friday, now into Saturday morning, and through Sunday, that it'll be right there along that stalled out boundary that we're expecting this weekend to see the next precipitation in the midsection of the United States stretching up to this part of Ontario. See it right there? And at that point, this will be an area we're going to watch carefully for the day 4 through day 10 time period as being wetter than normal. It's all about the shifting around of that high pressure cell. So this gets us out through this upcoming weekend. From there, let's talk about the upper levels of the atmosphere. And what I really want you to watch in this animation is first going to be the pattern across North America. And then secondly, what happens here from the Chukchi Sea to the Bering Sea. Let's get this playing. Working our way through the middle of the week, there's the ridge we were discussing. That's the ridge that introduces the warmer conditions. And as the trough cuts into the western U.S., see it right here? This will eventually set us up with that pattern. There it is, where the flow does something just like that. Now this is the upper level flow. At the surface, the high pressure cell is here, and it's feeding the moisture right on a boundary that will sit just beneath where I'm drawing. Now after that, and the precipitation picks up here, what I want you to watch is what's happening in that first area I mentioned to you, right here. Because as I play this from this weekend, getting into next week, we just continue to see troughs coming out of this region, and they cut into the Gulf of Alaska and come into the Pacific Northwest. And that's going to keep our week 2 quite active for the West, and also potentially here for parts of the central U.S. getting over into the southeast. To finish this though, look at what's happening over here in Eastern Europe, getting up into the Arctic. It appears to be a bit of a block happening in this area, and I'm concerned that this might eventually disrupt, if this materializes and continues, might disrupt the polar vortex. I'll show what I mean in just a few moments here. So when we look out here at the day 10 pattern, this would be Wednesday night, okay, just before Thanksgiving. You see what I mentioned here. See the trough and the trough here. So the flow is going to come around this and run straight up into this area. By the time we get to day 15, that should say day 15 here, November 30th, we once again see the atmosphere continue to place its deepest troughs coming out of the Bering Sea, out of the Chukchi Sea, across Alaska into the Gulf of Alaska. Now, what does that do to our precipitation pattern? Well, here what we're looking at is this Wednesday to next Wednesday. And that's the area, as that high pressure cell moves here, that we start to really feed the moisture in on this boundary that's going to park in this area. By the time we get out to day 15, that's where we see the wetter conditions here. And in week 2, it could possibly be parts of the Tennessee Valley, Ohio River Valley, getting back to the Mid-South, that we could see some wetter conditions. But notice these anomalies are not strong. From there, let's talk about soil moisture. And I'm going to come back to this Wednesday to next Wednesday and target this area through here. Because you notice that looking over here at our top 1 meter or 3 feet of soil moisture percentile, that's an area that needs to have some moisture return to it. And the earlier we get it in there, the better, especially as we're doing some fall field work right in through this area. So there are some pockets in here that are very, very dry. Now, turning our attention over to temperatures, here's Monday's maximum temperatures. As we play this through the week, we'll pause it right here on Tuesday. So we see we do have a bit of a cooler slice of air coming through, but watch the return of warmth from Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday in the midsection of the United States. That's where the ridge builds in. And even as that high pressure center slides to the east toward the end of this week, and things start to get a bit wetter right in through here for Saturday and Sunday, it's not as though it's being accompanied by very cold air. And even out to Sunday, you still see that right in through here, near average temperatures. In fact, it's kind of nice to be able to show you a temperature map with anomalies shaded that doesn't have such, extremes one way to the other here as we work our way into next weekend. Beyond that, though, the day 5 through 10 from the GFS is on the left, Europeans on the right. There's agreement here that the coldest regions are going to be up here in our Canadian provinces compared to normal. And broad scale warmth compared to average, a few degrees above average here across much of the United States. We go from there out to the 11 to 15 day. The models continue to advertise that through the start of December, we're going to see temperatures hovering closer to average, and any cold air intrusion will be relatively brief, and we'll see a return toward what we would call normal pretty quickly here. From there, though, I do want to bring up one thing, and that is what's going on with our polar vortex. It is clearly oriented right here, over that region where we're seeing the sharp contrast between where we have the open water here, where the sea ice has yet to fill, and the Bering Sea. There seems to be something about the heat transfer in this area to the upper levels of the atmosphere that seems to be keeping the polar vortex in this area. I also believe that the blocking that we're seeing set up here, over the Ural Mountains, this would be Eastern Europe, over to Russia, Siberia, is critical to this as well. Now, what we're going to watch for is anything that could take the strength of the polar vortex, which is currently here, stronger than normal, and just drop it off, displace that vortex, shear it apart, disrupt it or something. And what I see here is as I play this forward through the next 10 days, I don't necessarily see that happening. It continues to stay here. It does attempt to elongate, but this is the kind of feature we have to be watching once we get into December, January for potential disruption, and there are some long-range models that are suggesting that. From there, though, I want to take you to the tropics. And as we look longer term in this forecast and towards South America, the MJO comes out of phase 2 over the next couple of days and collapses back into null space. So that means it's going to go from here, which as you can see sits over phase 2, and it just weakens, but possibly starts to move better over toward phase 4 and 5. And I'm going to show you why that's important in just a few moments for South America. In addition to this, we can see here that starting back at the beginning of summer and going now through November the 14th, our La Nina is quite a robust feature. And as of late, we've had some warming. It's now only 1 degree Celsius below normal. But I'll tell you, this La Nina isn't going anywhere, and those trade winds, as you see right in through here, are still quite strong. But what's important about the shifting of the MJO and the position of those trade winds is what it's doing here in South America. Now, 2 maps to talk about. On the left, that's total accumulated precipitation through the next week, and on the right, it's the same value compared to normal. Where we've been seeing some dry conditions as of late in parts of southern Brazil, but really into Argentina, the next week is not favoring wet conditions. With MJO in phase 2, it's really favoring very wet conditions over the Amazon. So it will be scattered, hit or miss type precipitation through some of Brazil's primary growing areas there, from Mato Grosso to Mato Grosso do Sul, Minas Gerais, Bahia, that region, and drier down here in Rio Grande do Sul in Argentina. But notice this, as the MJO collapses and those strong trade winds take back over, we get this for the week 2 pattern. It now shows up, and I've seen several model runs suggest this, that we could go over to a slightly wetter pattern in Argentina, which would be critical for the success of the crop down there. And we then see that much of Brazil and their major growing areas goes over dry for the week 2 pattern. I just want you to watch this with me all week to see if it does set up this way. Because with the MJO collapsing and the trade winds from the La Nina taking over, we could see some variability in this map, and I'm going to watch it and report on it. Because at this point, we've not seen, across a broad sector of Brazil or Argentina, the most favorable conditions to get them started off to this growing season. Which means we're going to watch it carefully over the coming weeks and months to see how things set up there. With that, though, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video and hope you all have a great week, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.